Oh hey, what's up gentlemen and ladies? Happy National Fried Chicken Day. If you're wondering what all this is about, I've just been practicing my monster drawings lately. See, if my favorite RPG company of all time, Square Enix, has taught me anything, it's that all you need to be one of the most famous video game directors in all of Japan is just to start off by drawing obscure monsters for 16-bit RPGs. I like to call this guy the Scrub Slayer. What do you guys think? My parents told me not to drop out of college for this, but who's laughing now? Tetsuya Nomura is a very well-known name, especially in the Japanese game industry. Despite being interested in art and drawing from a young age, Nomura actually studied advertisement, which is what he was originally hired at Square Enix for, but he eventually began to get more involved with the games, being a debugger for Final Fantasy IV, working on some of the battle graphics and even monster designs in Final Fantasy V, helping with a few characters in Final Fantasy VI, as well as being the lead graphics director, and eventually becoming the sole character designer for Final Fantasy VII and subsequently Guys, Brave Fencer Musashi, Final Fantasy VIII, The Bouncer, Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy X-2, Before Crisis, Dirge of Cerberus, Crisis Core, Dissidia, Dissidia Duodecim, Dissidia NT, Final Fantasy XIII, Final Fantasy XIII-2, Lightning Returns, Type 0, World of Final Fantasy, and let's face it, pretty much every damn game that Square Enix has ever even laid a finger on that doesn't start with the letter D and end in Dragon Quest. He's even done some character work outside of Square Enix, like in Terra Battle or Xenoblade Chronicles, and of course Final Fantasy characters in other games like Noctis and Tekken 7 or Cloud in Super Smash Bros. That's right, Nomura's work was so well known within the video game world that he even made it into Super Smash Bros. Now, I know that may not seem like a big deal nowadays, but once upon a time, not too long ago, Super Smash Bros. Actually had standards. Oh come on guys, Daisy! Really? Now, even though nowadays most people think of Nomura as a director on top of a character designer, it's worth noting that this wasn't really the case even just a few years back. Nomura only really got his start directing with two separate titles relating to Final Fantasy: their Disney collaboration with Kingdom Hearts, and their Final Fantasy VII film, Advent Children, both of which were actually kind of bad if I'm being honest. I mean, Advent Children has some fun to be had in just how stupid and ridiculously over the top some of the fight scenes are, and while it may not be as bad as The Spirits Within, it's nothing to write home about. The plot was very weak, the contrived return of Sephiroth just to have a dumb anime fight scene in the end was bad, and it kind of ruined the ending of the original Final Fantasy VII. Not to mention that this film arguably gave birth to Emo Cloud, a personality that most FF7 fans have learned to hate. I say arguably because some people might argue that Emo Cloud actually got his start in the original Kingdom Hearts, which was Tetsuya Nomura's first video game director role. Now, I don't need to sit here and rant to you guys about the original Kingdom Hearts. Many people already have, and for as much as it does right in terms of charm and story, something that you really don't see handled that well in the future installments, the gameplay is just a slog to get through. It has aged horribly by today's standards. You are extremely limited in your options for an action game. Everything feels very heavy and clunky, which isn't helped by the fact that they have forced platforming sections for no reason. The game requires an insane amount of grinding towards the end, not to mention the entire time you have to wrestle with this awful 2002 PlayStation 2 camera control that just, 0 out of 10, too many zippers. Kingdom Hearts 2, on the other hand, everything that Kingdom Hearts did bad, Kingdom Hearts 2 fixed. They completely removed the terrible platforming. They made the main character Sora feel light and flexible, like you really have control over what you're doing. The camera actually kind of functions like a real video game camera. I know, what a shocker. This time around, they decided to map it to the right analog stick instead of the two bumper buttons, and the combat, oh, the combat. Gold standard for action RPGs, in my opinion. This game is what finally proved to us, not just the consumers, but Square Enix themselves, that maybe this Nomura guy actually has something of value to offer. We had reached a level of RPG that Square Enix had never touched before, and fans all over the world were really excited to see what the company had in store from Tetsuya Nomura in his future games. Which is why it's kind of hard to think about the fact that those are the only two things that Nomura has ever directed. No, seriously. After Kingdom Hearts 2, Nomura was given his own Final Fantasy spin-off game in the form of Final Fantasy VII, which was the first, and to this day still only project that Nomura had actual free reign over. It wasn't like a sequel to another game or a collaboration with Disney. No, this was the only time that Nomura ever actually got to write his entire full original story from absolute scratch, and fans were all really excited to see what he had in store and what he could come up with. Naturally, Square Enix being, well, Square Enix though, they decided to take that thing away from him and give it to somebody else. Now, in Square Enix's defense, they actually took Nomura off the project because they had another game that they wanted him to work on. See, in the time between Final Fantasy Versus 13 being announced and it getting its name changed to Final Fantasy 15, Nomura had actually been working on several Kingdom Hearts titles for handheld systems, but fans of the series really just wanted to see a mainline Kingdom Hearts 3 back on the home consoles, which is exactly what they put Nomura on. But some of you might be saying that Nomura is no stranger to working on multiple projects at the same time, which is very true. However, Square Enix had much more in store for him than just this. Not only did they want him to direct Kingdom Hearts 3, but also another game, possibly Square Enix's biggest and most ambitious project in decades. Square Enix was planning on remaking their biggest and best-selling game of all time, Final Fantasy VII, and they wanted none other than Nomura to direct it. Whoa, Nomura? I mean, he was involved with the original FF7 with things like character design and like battle visuals, but why do they want him to be the director? Well, the thing is, ever since the creator of the Final Fantasy series, Hironobu Sakaguchi, left the company back in 2003, the franchise had kind of been struggling to find key people to take over him, trying pretty much one new director with every new game to varying degrees of success. Hiroyuki Ito directed Final Fantasy XII, for example, which was worked on by what most people like to call the Final Fantasy Tactics team, a team that is all but non-existent within the current Square Enix business divisions. Motomu Toriyama, a writer from back in FF10, directed the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, which was met with, let's say, less than stellar reviews. Naoki Yoshida is considered a pretty competent director by most fan standards. However, he's constantly busy with Final Fantasy XIV, especially after having to clean up the catastrophic mess that game was when it first launched. And Final Fantasy XV was directed by Hajime Tabata of Crisis Core and Type 0 fame, but his team was not really used to developing major home console releases, and as a result, working on Final Fantasy XV was very stressful for him. He has since stepped down from that team and is now working for the company on AAA non-Final Fantasy games. So when Square Enix was planning on remaking Final Fantasy VII, they really needed someone who they felt could really carry a project that was this big, so they decided to put Tetsuya Nomura on the director's seat.
It's a hard knock life for us. It's a hard knock life for us. Static treated, we get tricked. Static kisses, we get kicked. It's a hard knock life.
No, seriously, like they actually made that decision on their own without asking Nomura first. See, they had kind of like a mini reveal for the FF7 remake within the company among the staff. They basically gathered everyone up and played a teaser for the game, the same one that we would later see at E3 2015. The moment that Tetsuya Nomura's name came up on screen under the word director is actually the moment that he found out he was going to be involved with the project, which is pretty stupid if you ask me. I mean, according to some recent leaks having to do with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Nomura is pretty much director in name alone. Supposedly, he spends most of his time in Osaka working with the Kingdom Hearts team, which I honestly can't really blame him for. Kingdom Hearts is his baby, and it's a project that he's been building up to for years at this point. It's no surprise that he would be more interested in working on that instead of a game that they just kind of told him he was going to have to direct one day. But sadly, this has kind of given Nomura a title that I honestly feel he did not earn, nor does he want. Since Nomura was involved in pretty major ways in the current three big Square Enix titles of Final Fantasy XV, Kingdom Hearts 3, and the Final Fantasy VII Remake, people have kind of started to look at him as like the new Sakaguchi. He's like the new face of Square Enix in charge of most of their big projects. Now, admittedly, this is in part due to Square Enix themselves wanting to market the hell out of this guy's name. I mentioned before that he did character design for every game from here to Eswatini, and they make sure to let you know that. What do you always see at the bottom of every Square Enix game main menu? Character design, Tetsuya Nomura. Even if that's literally all he did for the game, they'll put his name at the bottom. They won't put like the director's name or the producer's name, but they'll put Nomura's. Even if he wasn't involved with the project in years, like with Final Fantasy XV, where Roberto Ferrari designed most of the characters from 2013 on. Oh, they'll just write main character design, Tetsuya Nomura. I'm telling you guys, if they can put this man's name in front of your face, they will. So it's really no surprise that he became the face of Square Enix so quickly, but sadly, this comes with some pretty negative consequences. As a result, Square Enix wanted every game that they worked on to have Nomura's name attached to it, especially if it was as a director. We already mentioned how they're essentially forcing him to direct the FF7 remake when he's still busy with Kingdom Hearts 3, and this has only hurt the remake in the long run. Nomura not giving the project the attention it deserves forced the company to start outsourcing parts of that game to CyberConnect 2, and we all know how things ended up going there. But as if two of Square Enix's biggest games in years wasn't enough, believe it or not, Square Enix already has quite a backlog of games that they want Nomura to head once he's done with the projects that he's working on now. One project that Shinji Hashimoto has been teasing for a while now is a possible new game in the Final Fantasy X universe, or Final Fantasy X-3 as fans have dubbed it. This was only helped by the terrible audio drama that was included with the HD remaster that we shall not talk about, but to read the exact quote, Mr. Kitase and Nomura know full well that fans are waiting for this FF10-3 at the moment, but they also know that there is a big wait for the FF7 remake, and the development of the latter is already underway. The developers are working hard and focusing foremost on the production of the remake for the time being. Now here you have one of the biggest producers in all of Square Enix essentially telling us that they know fans want FF10-3, but that they haven't started working on it specifically because Nomura and Kitase are too busy with the FF7 remake. Now, I know that the team that is currently working on the FF7 remake is the team that worked on the original Final Fantasy X and X-2, so it would be nice to have them come back for a X-3, but Square Enix has shown us in the past that they're not against completely shifting teams for their series. For example, Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 were originally worked on what most people call the Nomura team, that nowadays is pretty integrated into Business Divisions 1 and 2. However, Kingdom Hearts 3 is actually being worked on by Business Division 3, who didn't start working on the Kingdom Hearts series until 2010 with Birth by Sleep. So despite Nomura not actually doing much for the original Final Fantasy X outside of character design, it seems like they're pretty much just waiting on him to be able to work on Final Fantasy X-3. But that's not all. Back in June of 2016, Nomura actually went over to LA for E3 for some inexplicable reason that I will never understand. He really didn't have any game that he was showing off that year. Okay, I guess Kingdom Hearts 2.8, but pretty much that entire E3 was dominated by Final Fantasy XV in terms of Square Enix, but whatever, let's just ignore that for now. During the event, Nomura was interviewed by Famitsu, where they talked about the Final Fantasy VII Remake, as well as the cult classic World Ends With You, or as most of you might know it, that game that those characters in that one Kingdom Hearts game were from. Now, obviously, nowadays, we're getting a Switch port of the World Ends With You, which does include that new episode that wasn't in the original. However, I've still seen a lot of fans asking for some kind of sequel to this game, even if it's like in the Final Fantasy style, where it's got an entirely new cast and original plot, because from my limited understanding of the story, the game didn't really need a sequel. And before anyone asks, no, I have not beat The World Ends With You, okay? The DS version has been sitting on my shelf for years now, but at this point, I'm just waiting to play it on Switch. But anyways, in that interview, Nomura said that he knows fans, especially from outside of Japan, have been asking for a sequel to this game, and even though it wouldn't really be an easy game to make, he would still like to if he can get the proper staff to work on it. So on the one hand, you have FF10-3, which seems very similar to the FF7 remake in that it seems like Square Enix themselves are pushing the game onto Nomura. But on the other hand, you have The World Ends With You 2, which seems very similar to Kingdom Hearts 3 in that it's a smaller game, but with a very loyal fan base that Nomura personally would like to see get made. And guys, I swear that about a year ago, I saw an article that mentioned a possible new Parasite Eve game, and that they were basically waiting for Nomura to not be busy anymore so that he could work on it, even though once again he had little to no involvement with the actual making of the first two games in that series. But I was unable to find that article again, so you guys will just kind of have to take my word for it. But okay, let's actually take a look at just how ridiculous and stupid this entire situation is, okay? So Tetsuya Nomura is currently working on Kingdom Hearts 3, which we know is supposed to come out out in 2019. Now, even though a lot of the FF7 remake was scratched, and let's face it, Square Enix is not the fastest on working on games, both Final Fantasy XV and Kingdom Hearts 3 taking about 5 years to develop each, let's just be generous and say that they could crank out the 7 remake in 2 years, so that's 2021. However, we're forgetting that the 7 remake is actually going to be separated into multiple games that, according to Square Enix, will each be about the length of one regular full-sized RPG. Okay, so the closest thing that we can compare to this is the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, and those games reused a lot of assets, and the latter two didn't take nearly as long to develop as the original, so let's just say that each one takes about 2 years to come out after the original. And people's most generous predictions for the lowest amount of parts that the remake will get is 3, but it's worth noting that as of now we don't really know. It could be 2, it could be 10, I guess we'll see. So that's part 1 in 2021, part 2 in 2023, and part 3 in 2025. Then, let's say that they finally begin to work on Final Fantasy X-3 after that, like Hashimoto promised that they would do after the remake. Let's just say that by some miracle, they finish the entire game in just 3 years, because even though it's largely a new game that's being worked on for the PS4 or maybe even PS5 by this point, it is still a sequel to Final Fantasy X, so bare minimum that's 2028. We're already 10 years into the future, and we're just getting started, guys. Because then it's time to work on The World Ends With You 2. Now, it's a smaller game that probably wouldn't have the budget of a 7 remake, for example, but even then, it usually takes a while to make these regardless. So let's say 2 years. We're in the year 2030, guys. Can you even picture that right now? Oh, but that's not all. Because when that game comes out, we can finally get started on a sequel to everyone's favorite Parasite Eve. Keep in mind that this game would be releasing 20 years after the last installment with the 3rd birthday back in 2010. Again, smaller title, let's be generous and say 2 years, so that's 2032. And then, only then, will Nomura actually be free to work on other games that he wants to make, like let's say, I don't know, Kingdom Hearts 4? Yeah, keep in mind that this means close to 15 years with no Kingdom Hearts games, because from now to then, Nomura is already booked, so we can forget about that. And this is assuming that they don't also want Nomura to direct Final Fantasy XVI, because honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they did that too. So then that would be 15 years without a mainline Final Fantasy game, and we usually get them at an average of 1 every 2 years, and then close to 20 years with no Kingdom Hearts game. That's longer than the series has even been around. And before anyone says that they could make like more handheld games, keep in mind that Kingdom Hearts 3 is the end of the Xehanort saga, and I strongly doubt that they would want to start a new story with a handheld game. The very next Kingdom Hearts game after 3 pretty much has to be 4. Now, are you guys starting to see just how ridiculous this entire situation sounds? And all of this just because Square Enix is putting all their eggs in one basket. They're banking on this man, Tetsuya Nomura, to work on every big project that they have just because his name is well known and fans will really like him. But that's only gonna hurt all of these projects in the long run. Square Enix is a company full of talented people that would kill to direct the next Final Fantasy, but sadly, they're choosing to play it safe. And again, I understand where they're coming from. The Final Fantasy series in the recent years has gotten a lot of backlash from fans for various different reasons, and it can be scary to give such big projects to new guys. It's much easier to attach someone's name who has already proved himself. Once again, despite the fact that he has only ever directed Kingdom Hearts and Advent Children. I still can't get over that. I don't know, guys. After hearing all that and seeing people's reactions to my monster drawing, I kind of want to give up on my career as an artist. And it's a shame, too, because I just got into character design. Scrub Slayer 2.0, by the way. But I think it's time that I put the pencil down and, I don't know, study law or something. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, then please consider pledging on Patreon. It really helps me out. Shout out to Planner Walk for already pledging. And I guess that's all that I have for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to blitz that like button, subscribe as always. Stay tuned, Kupo.